Hey, what's going on, you guys? My name is the Raptor, and I can't believe I'm about to do this. About a year and a half ago, I counted down my top 10 most wanted death battles, and that video can only be described as horribly outdated. Half of those matchups either have happened or have been confirmed to happen later, which is great, but naturally this leads to some people having questions. So as a thank you to the community for allowing one of those matchups to get funded on the Kickstarter, I am giving you all not my top 10, not my top 20, but my top 50 most wanted death battle episodes. Jesus Christ. Now, of course, none of this is set in stone. Matchups could shift up or down. I might learn about some that completely dominate the ranking. Things change for me all the time. And I want these fights to become death battles in the future, obviously, but that being said, I am not interested in updating this massive list whenever any of that happens. If anything, you could use this as a way to gauge what my top 10 or 20 would more or less look like after however much time has passed. I feel I can leave it at this for a good while unless I really feel the need to say something. But that's enough of that. We've got a lot to go through, so sit back, relax, and Lord have mercy on my soul. Number 50, Henry Stickmin versus the Second Coming. Just barely making it in is an idea that was kinda out there for me at first, but is slowly growing on me more and more. Some people from my Discord server like it a lot, and I think it's a very inspired choice for a matchup where you can basically do anything you want with it. If they ended up doing more of a Stickman Battle Royale instead, I would be just as pleased with that, although I still hold to it that it's not the absolutely necessary choice. Just these two is more than enough to deliver. Number 49, Spike Spiegel versus RWBY. I can't say I knew much about this one before the Tournament of Champions, but since then, I've grown a liking to it. There's a lot of Han Solo energy to be found here, and the clash of these characters' personalities and skill sets I think would be cool. But to be fair, there's a big element of learning more about two awesome series and encouraging older anime to show up that makes me want to root for it. I don't want Death Battle to just cover what I know really well. They've introduced me to some pretty sweet stuff. Number 48, Sarge versus Soldier. This has never been among my top most wanted, but I certainly understand its appeals and significance as a would-be episode. We need a normal red versus blue fight, we need a good TF2 fight, and if they find a way to wrap up the Boomstick's dad stuff without making it too much, I think that's fine too. There's just tons of unique humor from both series that could bounce off each other really well, and I have enough of a passing interest in both of them to enjoy all the hijinks that would ensue. Number 47, Cyborg versus The Thing. This is one of the less obvious DC versus Marvel ideas, and while it's gained some traction recently, I can't imagine everyone here will like it. There's not all too much that connects these two, but the stuff that does is very representative of their awesome, well-written characters. It's also really hard to find fights for them where they don't absolutely destroy through hacking or clobbering, so I have zero issue with this as the debate. I love Teen Titans and Fantastic Four so much, man, and it's crazy to me how well this could actually work. Number 46, V versus Rorschach. Yeah, this is actually my most wanted Watchmen fight, go figure. I usually like staying away from politics and versus debating, but Alan Moore's writing can make the analyses really damn interesting. Plus, I actually really like the way V for Vendetta deconstructs anarchism and chaos, and of course, Watchmen is Watchmen. I'd love to see this done in live action if possible, to hammer home the ugly, almost too true-to-life aesthetic that comes with these novels. But either way, it's still a good fight for the medium. Number 45, Rex Salazar versus Max Steel. My familiarity with these characters is limited, but I know this episode could display a lot of things that I love seeing on the show. Such relatable, likable protagonists that are put into a situation they've been in 100 times, except trying to overpower someone just as crafty. Their abilities are pretty well defined, but you can still get creative in the animation, and I think this could serve as a great introduction for people and really get them hooked on the franchises, if Death Battle deems it relevant enough. Number 44, Chaos versus Kyogre. I like Sonic a lot and Pokemon quite a bit, but there aren't many major fights left with either of them that really catch my attention. Well, unless you count a Mewtwo versus Shadow rematch, but I still prefer seeing new ideas, this being one of them. Water effects are certainly pretty hard to animate, but I think the crew could be up to the challenge provided they give everything enough time. It would be a good old-fashioned video game episode, kinda like the ones they used to do more often. I think that'd be nice. Number 43, Naruto versus Luffy. Yeah, sorry guys, but I actually kind of like this matchup. It is incredibly flawed connections-wise, but also something that could be a lot of fun with a great spectacle. I think you can find opponents that are marginally better for Luffy in specific ways, but the way I see it, if a character doesn't have a perfect match, you just go with the hard-hitting legacy. I wouldn't mind if it, quote, needed to happen later. I just think the final product would turn out monumental, because it has good stuff too. Number 42, Zeus versus Odin. This boils down to two things. I loved Hercules versus Sun Wukong, and I'm fascinated by both of these mythologies. This feels like one of those debates that just has to be covered on a show like this, even if you don't end up needing to do that much digging of your own to get a good handle on it. These analyses could feel like the ultimate deconstruction of what sets Greek and Norse gods apart, as well as giving us a mind-bending animation that lives up to the king's reputations. I personally could not refuse such a concept. Number 41, Tenya Ida versus A-Train. I'm a really big fan of speedsters in general, and this is really the biggest one people have been talking about. Not just that, I think the personal development and struggles these characters have faced are quite interesting. They may not be that versatile, but there's still a lot to talk about. The way I see it, just make this episode a better version of Flash versus Quicksilver. Keep the animation pretty grounded, but utilize what makes these guys special. I'm excited to see how A-Train's story wraps up in the last season of The Boys. Number 40, Gohan versus Ultraman Zero. While I tend to like the Dragon Ball episodes, I still want the matchups themselves to be better rather than being worse. And I'm not saying this one's perfect, but as someone who wants to see Gohan and Ultraman get an episode, I think this is a very different but still satisfying combination. I basically learned about this idea while building the Dream Season video earlier this year, and I have far from forgotten about it. I truly believe it could give us exactly what we would want from it. Number 39, Boros versus Battle Beast. After Omni-Man versus Bardock, I'm wondering if there are people who don't want this one as much now, but I've always considered this one of the most raw ideas from either series. I really can't imagine it happening until after Battle Beast gets more time in the show, and that's fine with me. I just like the matchup for what it is. They come from very different subversive takes on superhero worlds, and there's still a lot to talk about that Death Battle hasn't really got to cover before. I can only imagine how over the top the fight could get. Number 38, Finn and Jake versus Mordecai and Rigby. This matchup seems to be personal to every one of you in this community, and it just is not to me in that way. But I still recognize it for the idea that it is. I think pitting together two lovable cartoon duos that manage to be silly and tackle serious subjects as well is pretty genius for Death Battle. I'm arguably even more excited for the analyses and the animation when this episode finally comes, but the fact that it could easily be so good in both areas means it's not something I can just dismiss. Number 37, Harry Potter versus Percy Jackson. Yeah, go ahead, groan all you want. There are plenty of good reasons to not like this idea. I just want Percy on the show too much, and like with Luffy, when someone doesn't have a perfect opponent, I just go with the classic. I enjoy Harry Potter, but I don't blame anyone for having a very specific aversion to it. The biggest problem to me here is just the debatability. I think lots of other elements are really good, although there's a decent chance I'll just have to accept Percy versus Zagreus into my heart. Fine, I guess. Number 36, Beast Boy versus Kamen Rider O's. This is a bit of an odd one. Beast Boy is one of my most wanted characters for the series, but he's surprisingly a bit too overpowered in the comics for most of his fight ideas to be interesting. After much thought, I've come to the conclusion that Kamen Rider O's is the most well-rounded character for him to fight. Their abilities and personalities could play off of each other well. I wouldn't say it's perfect, and I may find a different preferred for BB later, but I'd still say it's something I want right now. Number 35, King K. Rool versus Blackbeard. I'm surprised to say this ended up being my most anticipated idea with One Piece or Mario characters, or Mario adjacent. I know the debate has one or two awkward hurdles that might frustrate some people, but to me that's part of it, tackling the hard stuff if it's still worthwhile. It's a funny combination that makes sense and could lead to some insane power clashing. If you'd prefer that they wait, okay, but I don't think every major One Piece character should indefinitely be put on hold. Number 34, Yuji Itadori versus Denji. Yes, I have hopped on this hype train pretty hard. We all know what's gonna happen anyway, and if they just have the same people who did Gojo versus Makima do this one, I would be all in. I'm kind of just a sucker for anime protagonist fights, which clearly get a lot of buzz for the channel, so with this being the big new one, I find it hard to not get excited at the prospects. Plus, this is a very different debate and dynamic from Gojo versus Makima, so giving it a feel that emphasizes their sides of the story would properly set it apart. Number 33, Ellie versus Clementine. This to me is less of a fight where the goal is to kill and more so to just keep yourself alive by any means necessary. It could deliver something so new yet so fitting for the show with such a perfect blend of skill, intensity, and sheer battle instincts. I thought Leon versus Frank was fun, but if we want a zombie killer episode that emphasizes the ugliest side of that life, this is the way I would do it. It needs the right tone to work though, meaning no awkward or out of place humor, Liam. Or whoever writes it. Number 32, The Knight vs. Ori. It's not the highest up the ladder, but this is still my definitive indie game fight that I will not stop supporting. While most of those matchups have some kind of standout visual element, this one feels the furthest away from anything we've ever seen on the show. If they nail it, I don't think many people would care if the analyses were just average, and it could inspire so many people to check out these games for themselves. I wish it made more of a name for itself during the champion poll, but oh well. Number 31, Chaos vs. Superhero Squad Dr. Doom. I know very well that I'm in the minority here. I'll admit Chaos vs. Vortech has some things this matchup doesn't, but not enough to make me change my preferences. Partially because I like its specific dynamic, but also definitely a bit of bias. Considering how much I collected the Superhero Squad toys and then Skylanders after that, this is unironically the most personal matchup to me that I've seen, aside from Stitch vs. Rocket, basically. It could complete my childhood in a whole new way while also just being a comedic triumph. Number 30, Gwen Tennyson vs. Adam Eve. This one actually surprised me for how high it's gotten on my list, but yeah, it's my most anticipated matchup for both series. It felt like one of those things where you kind of don't realize how much you like about something until you give it some more thought. These characters have some very intriguing talents and enough material revolving around them to make good analysis segments out of. I really like these characters, I love their series, and I think they work really well together for a one-on-one fight. Number 29, Wing Gundam Zero vs. Eva 01. This is a fight I've gotten into more recently, and holy shit does this go hard. It's hard to believe we haven't seen anything from Evangelion yet, and while Shinji does have a variety of matchups, this one has the best balance of likelihood and just what I want to see out of my mech fights. I might change my mind on that later, but I think we deserve a pure, true mecha anime episode with today's resources. If they could pull this off in 3D while doing the styles of the series justice, it could be insane. Number 28, Daffy Duck vs. Donald Duck. I haven't talked about this idea nearly enough because it keeps getting overshadowed by the other one. The interaction potential here is absolute gold, and with such over-the-top personalities, the episode is just gonna write itself. Take the general framework they used for the DBX and up the general production and resources for it, and I genuinely do not see how they could fuck this up. This fight is cartoon violence to a T. You want to make it respectful to them? Just go crazy. Literally, that's it. Number 27, Vision vs. Red Tornado. I know I'm like the only person on Earth that actively wants this, but I have such a soft spot for this kind of character. Evolving past your evil programming and learning what it means to have humanity is great content for a death battle analysis, let alone the rest of the stories that are unique to them. If they gave this episode as hard-hitting of a script that Manhunter vs. Surfer had, along with a fast-paced animation that takes full advantage of their abilities, I think we could have one of the best Marvel vs. DC episodes in years. Number 26, The Grinch vs. Jack Skellington. I feel like there should be more fights I want more than this one, but it unironically has a lot of death battle elements I like. Tons of stylistic potential with iconic characters and a few surprises to be found in their capabilities. As far as fights that would definitely be done for certain holidays go, this is one of my all-time favorites. It works well and more than satisfies my hunger for some kind of Christmas episode. That might be the biggest reason why it's this high, but a personal list is gonna be personal, so it's fine. Number 25, Q vs. Mr. Miggs' Pitlick. Some of you guys are probably thinking, hey, isn't this just another Bill vs. Discord? And to that I say, hey, what's wrong with that? And frankly, this is my Bill vs. Discord. I have tons of experience with the series they're from. I love their similar outlooks with their powers and how they decide to use them. They're such great examples of the Loki trickster archetype. It's another fight where the debatability is a detractor, but not nearly enough to make me go against it. There's just way too much potential and fun to be had. Number 24, Omazeo vs. Lord Draken. This would be kind of weird as the first Kamen Rider episode, but to me this is undeniably its most badass matchup, and there are a lot of them. Even as someone who doesn't have a crazy big history with either corner of these worlds, I can feel the big dick energy that would emanate from a comparison like this. I think diving into evil versions of well-respected characters doesn't always get enough spotlight. It can make the script all the more interesting and give a sick tone to the fight you couldn't have otherwise. Number 23, Splinter vs. Shifu. Out of all the mentor matchups I know, this one feels the most up my alley. These guys are responsible for shaping some inspiring heroes that I love watching, and going over their origins as well can emphasize the importance of passing knowledge to the right people. This episode would give Splinter and Shifu the one thing they rarely ever get, the main focus, and a chance to be pushed to the brim as if they were the protagonists. Although with that being said, either of their deaths would probably depress me a lot. Number 22, Blade vs. Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I get this isn't everyone's preferred for either character, but I really can't find any substantial reasons to not like it. The later Buffy comics actually make this a really interesting fight, especially since these two are defined by how weird and crazy the stuff they have to face gets. It would definitely be asking a lot from the choreography, since that's really what you have to rely on, but that's also exactly what I want, proving who truly is the better vampire hunter through sheer skill and persistence. Number 21, Freddy Krueger vs. Pennywise. I got so much more into this matchup in this year alone, and now it almost cracks my top 20 ever. I feel like it could be easy to fumble if the tone's wrong or the fight doesn't go far enough, but the best case scenario for it is the perfect cinematic Halloween experience. There are other viable opponents like most combatants that exist, but in the biggest ways, I think this is undeniably the right one to go with. You can't just prioritize horror for Halloween, but you can definitely prioritize this one. Number 20, Homer Simpson vs. Peter Griffin. I'd be lying if I said these were my favorite adult cartoons ever, but there are no other characters from that media demo that work better for Death Battle than these two. They've been around forever. You cannot count the amount of WTF moments they have gone through, and that can make for such great humor and analysis moments. I do not care that they've already fought in canon. I straight up don't care, and I don't think it necessarily answers all of the questions in the first place. Sorry. Number 19, Pegasus Seiya vs. Sailor Moon. While I would get excited for Spike vs. RWBY, this is the older anime episode that has hooked me the longest. Outside of Dragon Ball, we have not had much anime that goes super cosmic. We could be shown exactly what these icons are capable of in the most epic way. If they end up doing Moon vs. Madoka, then I'll find a way to live with it, but I hope they recognize that just because something was popular enough to be on the Tournament of Champions doesn't mean it has to be what they go with. As long as copyright works out, that is. Number 18, Palpatine vs. Xehanort. When I say I want more villains on Death Battle, this pretty well encompasses why. It's kind of funny because sometimes I prefer it when villains have a moral complexity to them, but villains who love being evil just bring the best energy to this show. Yoda vs. King Mickey is still one of my favorite episodes ever, and I think if they nail the tone with this one, as well as go deeper into Star Wars and Kingdom Hearts scaling, it might just be able to top it. I would die laughing if they start the fight with, "Somehow Palpatine returned." Again. Number 17, Rocky Balboa versus Daniel LaRusso. I'll admit this isn't the easiest idea to warm up to for some people, but I absolutely love it as an underdog martial arts fight. I truly believe the clash of fighting styles could make the debate and choreography more interesting than just karate versus karate, and it'd be easy enough to adapt thanks to the live action medium the characters come from. I think some people underestimate the value of a grounded fight that emphasizes the struggles and accomplishments, but hey, that's what I want. Number 16, Scorpion vs. Wolf. This is far and away the biggest matchup that the Tournament of Champions kick-started my hype for. I have been wanting Scorpion to come back forever without any of his options appealing to me much, but bro, I think this is it. Especially when you consider how well Death Battle handled Dark Souls, and Skyrim for that matter, I think this could make for an amazing blend of these two types of games. Death Battle has kind of moved away from fighting games as of late, but if they're looking for a way to make it more compelling, go with this one. Number 15, Dark Willow vs. versus White Violin. If you know me well, you know that this is my most personal, obscure matchup. It's hard for me to even consider it for this because I think its chances for happening are 0, but when going up to 50 fights, I don't think excluding it is fair. Across the TV shows and comics, this matchup is chock full of emotional highs and lows, insanely powerful feats, and a connective tissue that focuses on a sense of self. But it has been soured for me a bit since finishing the Umbrella Academy show. Honestly, what the hell was that ending? Number 14, Ed, Edd, and Eddy versus Yakko, Wakko, and Dot. You bet your sweet Bippy I put this one on here. I gotta admit, I'm much more attached to the Animaniacs in this case, but this isn't just their best matchup, it's a legitimately dynamite suggestion that I wish got more attention. I see people come up with individual fights for each of the Eds quite often, and while I think that's a very fair route to take, I see this one as the best possible representation of what these characters are about. Wacky physical comedy as units, together. I would not want to forego that here. Number 13, Dan versus Jinga. I offhandedly brought up this matchup over a year ago, and the more I read up on it, the more I am down for it. Again, you could call this my version of a more popular fight, the one that's coming in 2025, so at this point, who even knows if this is likely or not? But it ranks high for me, being one of the most personal anime fights I think I could ever find, and their styles work really well together while also being different. Let me know if you watched Bakugan, I need to make sure it wasn't just me. Number 12, Perry versus Skipper. I've described my feelings towards this idea before as Stitch versus Rocket Light, and I think that's still pretty fair. It's not as much of a perfect match to me, but their roles within their worlds fit so cleanly together while allowing for a really fun fight. They have more going for them than you may expect, and it's so easy to get a source of both comedy and impressiveness from that. It's not really anyone's favorite cartoon fight, but it has enough of all the right elements to be spectacular, so it ranks really well for me. Number 11, Mysterio versus Scarecrow. While I do not mind Marvel versus DC as much as the average person, I will admit that this really is the one matchup left that feels like it needs to be done. I still see it as one of the next logical choices for a Halloween episode, and the animation potential is literally only limited by willpower. As someone who loves Spider-Man and Batman, I find it so refreshing to have a pairing of their villains that works differently from the rest. And if it had eerie analysis writing and editing to match, how could I say no? Number 10, Jimmy Neutron versus Dexter. This is the main cartoon matchup that feels like it flows in the same vein as Danny versus Jake or Steven versus Star. These series may never be relevant again, but this is one of the most obvious and exciting comparisons from this form of media that you can find. I've wanted to see this for so many years, and that was before we knew what Death Battle would grow into. I fully believe that the use of their tech and skills is something the show could knock out of the park, and they really deserve their time in this spotlight. Number 9, Old Man Logan versus The Last Ronin. I am so sorry, Mikey versus Jay fans, but this is my definitive matchup for a returning turtle. Mikey would deserve to return either way, but this is still the best way to bring characters back, employ a new emotional significance, even if they were the exact same versions as before. This has become one of my brother's most wanted episodes, and he never keeps track of this stuff. It shot up my ranking incredibly quickly too, and now I just can't stop thinking about it. It's a superb match made in heaven, no question. Number 8, Sackboy versus Maxwell. To all the people in my Discord, I thank you and curse you for converting me to this idea. I just don't see how anyone could be against it. The potential is whatever you want it to be. The games they come from are quite different, but still make for a stellar combination. Don't turn this matchup away just because you maybe didn't play one of the games. If you want more episodes like Bill versus Discord, you should be in support of this. It could be nostalgic, insane, hilarious, and besides, Scribblenauts is just the best. Number 7, Deathstroke versus Taskmaster. I'm probably pretty alone on this, and I accept that, but I cannot stop thinking about how fulfilling the animation and analyses could be here. These guys have done it all, they have learned it all, they are some of the most well-rounded street tiers you can find, and I'd be so excited to see how Death Battle portrays that in every way. If this somehow ends up being the 3D episode Torian returns for eventually, I will absolutely lose my shit. This at its best could be such a satisfying DC versus Marvel fight. Trust me. Number 6, Hellboy vs. Nero. I've been talking about this one since forever, and while it's no perfect matchup, it gives me so much of what I look for. It's not just that the franchises are awesome, the combatants have been through some absolutely wild stuff and have changed for the better by doing so. The themes are there, the possibilities for the animation are so there, the debatability might not be up to par, but the personality carries it real hard for me. Sometimes that's all it takes to like an idea, and there's nothing wrong with that. Number 5, Ghost Rider vs. Spawn. The more I think about it, the more it puzzles me how this was never covered across 14 years of the show. It's just one of the coolest hardcore ideas you could find. Every second of this episode could keep you engaged with the right editing and writing, let alone how the abilities are shown in the fight. I just love the concepts these characters share, and I think Death Battle has what it takes to nail the most insane supernatural comic fight ever. I've wanted it from the start, and now I only want it more. Number 4, Captain Kirk vs. Han Solo. I personally don't mind if anyone doesn't like this one, but you have to accept that it's the most appropriate way to make this kind of comparison between the most popular sci-fi series. And as a lover of that genre, and all things like it, I am adamant that the biggest versus show must cover this. With how much Star Wars they've done, and with how much some of the crew like Star Trek, I have a lot of hope that they'd represent both sides well and with care. It's just in my blood. I could never ever not hope for it. Number 3, Ken Kaneki vs. Eren Yeager. As far as anime matchups go, this one's mine, and I see it as no less than quintessential. The intensity and emotion at center stage here would be so captivating, let alone the mix of complex themes and insane moments across both sides. This would be a monster to try to animate, but it's so different from what we've gotten before, yet still with so many prospects that I am just crazy about it at this point. I do believe that with enough time and with enough effort, every aspect of this episode could blow us all away. Number 2, Hiccup and Toothless vs. Hero and Baymax. Looking back, I have no idea how this didn't make it into my previous top 10. It's kind of like I've been rediscovering how much I love it since the beginning of 2024. This is my Finn and Jake vs. Mordecai and Rigby. It is more about seeing two of my favorite animated movies on my favorite web show than anything else, but I still find it thematically perfect. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but you can't tell me that it couldn't be a unique, emotional, and crazy fun experience. It means so much to me. Watch these movies if you haven't already. Like, come on, what are you doing? And finally, at number 1, Cocaine Bear vs. Meth Gator. I mean, no, Mickey Mouse vs. Bugs Bunny. Obviously. That's what I meant. I really wish this was more of a surprise number 1 to most people, but there's just no way it could have been. I've already talked at length about why this is my most wanted in other videos. It really boils down to the infinite fight potential, monumental character legacies, and my love for who they are. Nothing will ever mean as much to me as Stitch vs. Rocket, but no upcoming episode could fill me with as much joy or fulfillment as this one. You can take your time, Death Battle. I will be here and I will be ready whenever we get it. Okay. We are finally done. I really hope you enjoyed this video because it took a lot out of me. Of course, leave any of your own most wanted episodes in the comments or any opinions you have on mine. I can't wait for everyone to just focus on the ones they don't like. Give this video a like and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. I am so happy Death Battle is back, and I can't wait to see many of our dream episodes come to life in the coming years. Have a great day, and peace out.